Emma Sullivan's heart froze as the tall stranger who'd just saved their farm turned his attention to her 10-year-old daughter, his weathered hands gently showing Lucy how to repair the fence that had kept them safe for 3 years. "Stay away from my daughter," she warned, even as her traitorous heart recognized the first stirrings of something she'd buried alongside her husband's memory. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Emma Sullivan stood on the front porch of the farmhouse she had struggled to keep for the past 3 years, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she watched the tall stranger working on her barn door. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard, turning everything golden as it sank toward the horizon. The peaceful scene belied the tension coiled inside her like a spring. "Mama, he fixed the tractor too." Lucy, her 10-year-old daughter, skipped across the yard, blonde braids bouncing, eyes bright with admiration for the man who had appeared on their property just 2 days ago. The metal bucket she carried swung carelessly at her side, water sloshing over the rim and darkening the parched earth in small patches. Emma pressed her lips together, forcing a smile for her daughter's benefit. "That's nice, sweetheart. Why don't you take that water inside and help with dinner?" Lucy's face fell slightly. "But Mr. Jackson said I could help feed the horses." "The horses can wait," Emma said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Inside, please." With a dramatic sigh that only pre-teen girls could perfect, Lucy trudged up the porch steps, casting one longing glance back at the barn before disappearing into the house. Emma waited until the screen door banged shut before she uncrossed her arms and made her way across the yard. Cole Jackson didn't look up as she approached, his attention focused on securing the hinge of the barn door that had been hanging precariously for months. His Stetson was pulled low, shading eyes she knew were the color of the summer sky. Work-worn hands moved with precise efficiency, the muscles in his forearms flexing beneath rolled-up sleeves of a faded plaid shirt. "You don't need to do all this," Emma said, stopping a careful distance away. He glanced up then, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I know, but your barn door was about to fall off, and that tractor wasn't going to fix itself." His deep voice sent an involuntary shiver down her spine, one she quickly suppressed. Cole Jackson had blown into her life like a West Texas dust storm, unexpected, powerful, and threatening to upset everything in his path. The fact that he'd arrived exactly when she needed help most only made him more dangerous. "We were managing just fine before you showed up," she replied, knowing it wasn't entirely true. The Sullivan farm had been slowly falling apart since Robert's death. Her limited knowledge of farming and even more limited finances creating a constant struggle to keep the place running. Cole straightened, his impressive height making her tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "I never said you weren't." Something in his quiet confidence both irritated and attracted her. Emma took a step back, needing distance from this man who seemed to see too much. "Look, Mr. Jackson." "Cole," he corrected, wiping his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. "Mr. Jackson," she continued firmly, "I appreciate what you've done, but I think it's time for you to move on. The farm may not be much, but it's ours, and we don't need—" "I'm not trying to take anything from you, Mrs. Sullivan." The gentleness in his tone made her words catch in her throat. "I'm just passing through. Saw a place that could use a few repairs and offered to help. No strings attached." Emma had learned the hard way that there were always strings attached. Life had taught her that lesson repeatedly since Robert's death had left her with a mortgage she couldn't afford, a farm she barely knew how to run, and a daughter to raise alone. "Nobody works for free," she said flatly. He shrugged those broad shoulders. "Consider it payment for the meals and the use of your bunkhouse." The small building that had once housed seasonal workers had stood empty for years. She'd offered it only because she couldn't send him away after he'd spent hours helping her free a pregnant heifer that had gotten stuck in the mud down by the creek. One night had somehow turned into two, and now he was fixing everything that had been broken around the farm for years. "And how long do you plan to stay?" she asked, dreading the answer. The longer he remained, the more Lucy looked at him with those adoring eyes, and the more Emma found herself wondering what it would be like to have a man like Cole Jackson in their lives permanently. "I hadn't really decided," he admitted, leaning against the newly repaired barn door. "Though I reckon you're about to decide for me." The setting sun caught in his hair, highlighting strands of gold among the brown. Emma forced herself to look away, to remember all the reasons why having this man around was a terrible idea. "Lucy's father has been gone 3 years," she said abruptly. "She's at an age where she gets attached easily, especially to—" She gestured vaguely at him, encompassing his whole being with that small motion. "To men who fix things," he supplied, though his eyes told her he understood exactly what she meant. "To men who seem like heroes," Emma clarified, "and I can't have her heart broken when you inevitably ride off to your next destination." Something flickered in his expression. "You seem pretty certain I'm the type to just ride off." "Aren't you?" she challenged. "You said yourself you're just passing through." Cole pushed his hat back, revealing more of that handsome face that had made Emma's heart skip when she first saw him carrying her daughter across the creek, Lucy's arms wrapped trustingly around his neck after she'd slipped and twisted her ankle. "Maybe I was," he acknowledged. "But sometimes plans change." The quiet certainty in his voice sent a wave of panic through her. This was exactly what she feared. Not that he would leave, but that he might want to stay. That possibility was far more terrifying. "Not this time," she said firmly. "I'm grateful for your help, truly. But we've survived on our own this long, and we'll keep doing so after you're gone." She met his gaze directly. "And I need you to stay away from my daughter. No more riding lessons, no more stories about your rodeo days, no more—" She swallowed hard. "No more giving her hope that things might be different." The hurt that flashed across his face made her stomach clench, but Emma stood her ground. She had to protect Lucy, and herself, from the inevitable pain that would come from allowing Cole Jackson any deeper into their lives. "I understand wanting to protect her," he said quietly. "But have you considered that maybe you're protecting yourself more?" Emma stiffened. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're strong," he replied without hesitation. "I know you've kept this place going against impossible odds. I know you love that little girl more than anything in this world." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I know you're scared." "I'm not scared of you," she shot back. His smile was gentle. "I didn't say you were scared of me, just scared." The simple truth of it struck her like a physical blow. She was scared, terrified of losing the farm, of failing Lucy, of opening her heart only to have it shattered again. But admitting that vulnerability to this virtual stranger was impossible. "Tomorrow morning," she said instead. "After breakfast, I think it would be best if you moved on." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once. "If that's what you want." "It is." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but Emma turned and walked away before he could see the truth in her eyes. The farm needed help. She needed help. But the price of accepting it from Cole Jackson might be higher than she could afford to pay. As she climbed the porch steps, she heard the sound of hammering resume from the barn. Even knowing he was leaving, he was still fixing what was broken. Emma paused at the door, allowing herself one glance back at the tall figure silhouetted against the sunset. "Mama," Lucy called from inside. "Is Mr. Jackson staying for dinner?" Emma took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders before she went back to being the strong, capable woman her daughter needed her to be. "Yes," she answered, "but just for tonight." Dinner was a quiet affair, the clinking of silverware against plates filling the silence that stretched between them. Lucy, usually chattering non-stop about school and friends and the animals, seemed to sense the tension and kept her eyes on her food. Emma had made chicken and dumplings, Robert's favorite, though she couldn't say why she'd chosen that particular meal tonight. "This is delicious, Mrs. Sullivan," Cole said, breaking the silence. "Been a long time since I've had a home-cooked meal this good." "Emma," she corrected without thinking, then pressed her lips together, as if regretting the small concession. "And thank you." Lucy brightened. "Mama makes the best dumplings in the county. She won the blue ribbon at the Harvest Festival last year." Cole smiled at the girl, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I believe it. My grandmother used to make chicken and dumplings, but hers weren't half as light as these." Emma watched their easy interaction with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Lucy needed male attention, a father figure to look up to. The school counselor had said as much during their last conference. But temporary attention could do more harm than good. "Where's your grandmother now?" Lucy asked, always curious about people's stories. A shadow passed over Cole's face. "She passed on about 5 years ago." "Like my daddy," Lucy said with the matter-of-fact acceptance only children can manage. "Do you miss her?" "Lucy," Emma cautioned, "that's personal." Cole shook his head. "It's all right." He set down his fork and gave Lucy his full attention. "Yes, I miss her every day. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was about your age." Emma felt her resolve weakening at this glimpse into his past. Orphaned young, raised by his grandmother, it explained something about the self-sufficiency she'd noticed in him, the quiet capability. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He glanced at her, surprise flickering in his eyes as if he hadn't expected her sympathy. "It was a long time ago. Gran made sure I never lacked for love, even if we didn't have much else." The parallel to her own situation with Lucy wasn't lost on Emma. She'd been doing her best to compensate for Robert's absence, but there were some things a mother just couldn't provide. "Is that why you travel around?" Lucy asked, leaning forward eagerly. "Because you don't have family anywhere?" Cole smiled, but Emma caught the fleeting sadness in his expression. "Partly. After Gran died, the house went to the bank. I worked ranch jobs for a while, then got into the rodeo circuit, made good money for a few years until this happened." He flexed his right shoulder slightly, and Emma remembered him wincing when he'd lifted a heavy feed bag the day before. "You got hurt?" Lucy's eyes widened. "Bull decided I'd overstayed my welcome," he said lightly, "threw me and then made sure I remembered the lesson." Emma could imagine it, the violence of being thrown from 1,500 pounds of angry bull, the vulnerability of a man on the ground with nowhere to run. The thought made her stomach tighten. "So now you just wander?" she asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. He met her eyes steadily. "I've been helping out at farms and ranches, working my way south. Thought I might head to Texas, see about steady work on one of the bigger spreads." "But you could stay here," Lucy blurted out, then ducked her head when Emma shot her a warning look. "Lucy, Mr. Jackson has his own plans," Emma said firmly, "and it's time for you to clear the table and get started on your homework." The girl's shoulders slumped, but she didn't argue. She gathered the plates, pausing beside Cole. "Will you still be here in the morning, before school?" Emma opened her mouth to answer for him, but Cole spoke first. "I'll be around to say goodbye before you leave for the bus," he promised. Lucy's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. She hurried to the kitchen with the dishes, and the sound of running water soon filled the silence she left behind. "You're good with her," Emma admitted reluctantly. Cole leaned back in his chair. She's a great kid. You've done a fine job raising her on your own. I haven't had much choice. Emma traced the rim of her water glass with one finger. Robert's accident, it wasn't something we planned for. Few things in life are, he said quietly. The understanding in his voice nearly undid her. 3 years of holding everything together, of being both mother and father, of lying awake at night wondering how she'd make the next mortgage payment. And here was someone who seemed to see the weight of it all without her having to explain. Lucy's teacher said there's a storm system moving in, she said, changing the subject. Supposed to be a bad one. Cole nodded. I heard the same on the radio. Flash flood warnings for the county. Emma's anxiety spiked. The creek that ran through their property had flooded twice before, once badly enough to reach the lower pasture, where most of their cattle grazed. With just her and Lucy, moving the herd to higher ground would be nearly impossible. What time is it supposed to hit? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Late tonight, from what they're saying. Worst of it tomorrow. His eyes narrowed slightly. You're worried about the creek? It wasn't a question. In just 2 days, he'd learned enough about her farm to understand its vulnerabilities. The cattle, she began. Need to be moved, he finished. First light would be best, before the heavy rain starts. Emma hesitated. Asking him to stay went against everything she'd decided earlier, but the thought of handling the herd alone with just Lucy to help terrified her. I know I said you should leave tomorrow, she began awkwardly. But you could use an extra hand with the cattle, he supplied, no judgment in his tone. Yes. The admission cost her pride, but her responsibility to the farm had to come first. Just until they're moved to safety, she added quickly. Then you can be on your way. Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. Of course. Lucy returned from the kitchen, her face lighting up when she saw them sitting together, talking like friends instead of wary strangers. Can I show Mr. Jackson my science project before bed? She asked hopefully. Emma sighed. Homework first, then 10 minutes for your project. It's a school night. Lucy beamed and darted back to her room, returning moments later with textbooks and pencils. Thank you, Cole said once Lucy was absorbed in her work at the far end of the table. For what? For letting me help. His voice was low enough that Lucy couldn't hear. I know it's not easy for you, accepting help from a stranger. Emma met his gaze. You're right, it's not. She hesitated, then added, but maybe you're not quite a stranger anymore. His slow smile made something warm unfurl in her chest, a feeling she'd thought long buried with Robert. It frightened her how easily this man had begun to dismantle the careful walls she'd built around herself and Lucy. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the old farmhouse. The promised storm was moving in faster than expected, bringing with it changes Emma wasn't sure she was ready to face. I should check on the animals before it gets worse, Cole said, rising from the table. Make sure everything's secure. Emma nodded, grateful for the momentary reprieve from his too perceptive gaze. There are extra rain slickers in the mudroom. As he shrugged into one of Robert's old jackets, too small across the shoulders but better than nothing, Emma found herself wondering what it would be like to have this man's steady presence around permanently, to share the burdens she'd carried alone for so long. The thought terrified her almost as much as it comforted her. Be careful out there, she said as he headed for the door. He turned, one hand on the doorknob, his eyes finding hers across the room. Always am. The simple exchange felt strangely intimate, like a ritual between people who'd shared years instead of days. As the door closed behind him and the wind howled louder outside, Emma knew that whatever storm was coming would leave nothing unchanged in its wake. Emma woke to the sound of rain hammering against the farmhouse roof. a steady drumming that told her the storm had arrived earlier than predicted. The luminous hands of her bedside clock showed just past 4 in the morning. She slipped out of bed, pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt, and padded barefoot to Lucy's room. Her daughter slept soundly, one arm thrown over her head, blonde braids splayed across the pillow. Emma tucked the quilt more securely around her shoulders before heading downstairs. She was surprised to find the kitchen light already on and the smell of coffee filling the air. Cole stood at the window, staring out at the darkness, a steaming mug in his hand. He'd obviously been up for a while. His hair was damp, not from the rain, but from a shower, and he wore a clean shirt, one of the few he kept in his duffel bag. "You're up early," she said. He turned, offering a slight smile. "Never could sleep through a storm. My grandmother used to say I had weather in my bones." "Coffee smells good." She moved to the cabinet for a mug. "I hope you don't mind. Thought we might need the extra energy today." He gestured toward the window. "It's coming down hard already. Creek's rising faster than I expected." Emma's stomach clenched as she poured herself coffee. "How bad?" "Not critical yet, but we shouldn't wait on moving those cattle." He took a sip from his mug. "I checked the weather radio. They're saying the worst of it will hit by noon." "Lucy has school." "Schools are closed," he said gently. "Emergency announcement came through about 20 minutes ago. Flash flood warnings for the whole county." Emma sank into a kitchen chair, relief and worry battling within her. With school canceled, Lucy would be home, which meant she'd be safe, but it also meant they'd need to deal with her while trying to move the herd. "She can stay in the house," Cole said, seeming to read her thoughts. "Old enough to understand she needs to stay put during the worst of it." Emma looked up at him, struck by how easily he understood her concerns without her having to voice them. Robert had been like that too, anticipating her needs, seeing the worries she tried to hide. "We should head out as soon as it's light enough," she said, pushing away the painful comparison. "The north pasture is on higher ground. If we can get the herd up there, they should be safe even if the creek overflows." Cole nodded. "I saddled the horses already. They're waiting in the barn, staying dry." The simple statement caught her off guard. "You didn't have to do that." "Wanted to get a head start." He shrugged, the movement causing him to wince slightly, that rodeo injury making itself known. "Your shoulder bothering you?" she asked before she could stop herself. He looked surprised at her concern. "Old injuries always act up in weather like this. Nothing to worry about." But Emma did worry. Moving cattle was hard physical work under the best conditions, in driving rain with a bad shoulder. "I can handle it," he assured her, correctly interpreting her expression. "Been working with worse." She didn't doubt it. Everything about Cole Jackson spoke of a man accustomed to pushing through pain, to doing what needed to be done regardless of personal discomfort. It was a quality she recognized, one she'd developed herself over the past 3 years. They finished their coffee in companionable silence, the rain providing a steady backdrop to their thoughts. Outside, the darkness gradually gave way to a gray, watery dawn. "I'll make some sandwiches," Emma said, rising from the table. "We'll need to eat something while we're out there." Cole rinsed his mug in the sink. "I'll check the equipment one more time, make sure we have everything we need." By the time Emma had packed a small cooler with food and filled thermoses with hot coffee, the rain had lightened to a steady drizzle. A false reprieve, she knew. The worst was still coming. She wrote a note for Lucy explaining where they'd gone and left it on the kitchen table, then pulled on her rain gear and boots. When she stepped onto the porch, Cole was waiting, 2 slickers draped over his arm. "These are better than what we've got in the mudroom," he said, handing her one. "Found them in the barn." Emma recognized them immediately. Heavy-duty rain gear Robert had ordered just before his accident, never used. She tucked them away in the barn, unable to look at them but equally unable to get rid of them. "Thank you," she managed, slipping into the coat. It was too big, of course, but the quality was undeniable. She would stay much drier in this than in her old slicker. They walked to the barn in silence, shoulders hunched against the rain. The horses nickered softly as they entered, warm breath visible in the cool morning air. "Lucy said you were giving her riding lessons," Emma said as she checked her mare's saddle. Cole paused, one foot in a stirrup. "Just basic stuff. How to sit properly, how to give commands. She's a natural." He hesitated. "I hope that was okay. She said you'd given permission." Emma sighed. Lucy's selective interpretation of conversations was becoming a problem. "Not exactly, but she loves horses, always has." "Like her mother?" The question surprised her. "What makes you say that?" He smiled as he swung into the saddle. "The way you handle them. That's not learned behavior. That's someone who's been around horses her whole life." He wasn't wrong. Emma had grown up on a horse farm 2 counties over, had been riding since before she could walk. It was how she'd met Robert, a city boy who'd come to buy his first horse and had left with her phone number instead. "My father raised quarter horses," she admitted as they rode out of the barn. "I practically lived in the saddle until college." "What did you study?" he asked, guiding his horse alongside hers as they headed toward the lower pasture. "Veterinary science for 2 years. Then I met Robert and—" She trailed off, surprised at herself for sharing so much. Plans changed. Cole nodded, not pressing for more. The rain was picking up again, forcing them to focus on the task ahead. The cattle were huddled together near a stand of trees, seeking whatever shelter they could find. Moving 50 head of cattle was never easy, but in these conditions, it would be particularly challenging. The ground was already turning muddy, creating treacherous footing for both horses and cattle. "We'll take it slow," Cole called over the increasing wind. "Steady pressure from behind, keep them moving in the right direction." Emma nodded, appreciating that he wasn't trying to take over completely. This was still her ranch, her herd. He was helping, not commanding. They worked in tandem, their years of experience with livestock creating an unspoken choreography between them. Emma found herself falling into an easy rhythm with Cole, anticipating his movements, responding to his subtle signals. It was like dancing with a partner who instinctively knew the steps. By the time they had the herd moving steadily toward the north pasture, the rain was coming down in sheets. Water ran in rivulets down Emma's face despite the hat pulled low over her eyes. The cattle were nervous, sensing the danger in the rising water and howling wind. A flash of lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lead cow bellowed in panic and suddenly changed direction, heading back toward the creek instead of away from it. The rest of the herd began to follow. "Cut them off," Emma shouted, already turning her horse to intercept the leaders. Cole reacted instantly, spurring his mount forward through the mud. They converged on the front of the herd, waving their arms and shouting to turn the frightened animals. For a moment, Emma thought they'd succeeded. Then another lightning strike, even closer, sent the cattle into a full stampede, directly toward the swollen creek. "Emma," Cole's voice carried over the chaos. "The ravine." She understood immediately. If they could funnel the cattle through the narrow ravine that cut across the eastern edge of the property, they could redirect them toward the north pasture. It was risky. The ravine might already be flooding, but it was their only chance to regain control. Side by side, they pushed their horses hard, racing ahead of the panicked herd. The rain lashed at them, nearly blinding in its intensity. Emma could feel her mare struggling beneath her, fighting for purchase on the increasingly slippery ground. As they approached the ravine, Emma's heart sank. Water was already rushing through it, turning the narrow passage into a churning brown torrent. "We can't go through there," she called to Cole. He nodded grimly. "We'll have to split up. You take the high side, I'll cut around below. If we can squeeze them between us, we might still turn them." It was dangerous, potentially deadly, if either of them got caught between the stampeding cattle and the rising water, but there was no time to formulate a better plan. "Be careful," Emma shouted as they separated, each racing to position themselves to save the herd and their livelihood. Emma's mare fought against the slick terrain as she urged her toward higher ground. Rain pelted her face like tiny needles, and the wind threatened to tear the reins from her grasp. Through the gray curtain of water, she could just make out Cole's form as he cut wide around the bottom of the ravine, his hat pulled low against the storm. The cattle were moving too fast, blind panic driving them toward the flooded creek. If they reached it, the rushing water would sweep away the calves and weaker animals instantly. Even the strongest might not survive the current. Emma pressed her heels into her horse's sides, pushing the animal to greater speed. They had to head off the leaders before disaster struck. She could feel her mare's muscles bunching and releasing beneath her. The animal's breathing labored as they raced across the sodden pasture. Lightning flashed again, striking a tree at the edge of the property. The crack and crash sent another wave of terror through the herd. Emma could see Cole waving his arms, trying to turn the front runners, but the animals were beyond reason now, driven by pure instinct. Then, from the corner of her eye, Emma caught a flash of pink, incongruous against the browns and grays of the stormy landscape. Her heart nearly stopped. Lucy was running across the field, waving her arms, headed straight for the path of the stampeding cattle. "Lucy!" Emma screamed, but her voice was lost in the howling wind. "No!" Cole saw her too. His head snapped toward the small figure, and without hesitation, he wheeled his horse around and galloped toward the child. Emma's world narrowed to those two figures, her daughter in imminent danger, and the man racing to save her. She abandoned her position and drove her horse toward them, but she knew she was too far away. It would all be over before she could reach them. Cole leaned low over his horse's neck, one arm extended as he approached Lucy. The girl had frozen in place, finally realizing the danger as the wall of panicked cattle bore down on her. At the last possible moment, Cole's arm hooked around Lucy's waist, sweeping her up and onto his horse in one fluid motion, but the maneuver cost him his balance. As Lucy clung to the horse's mane, Cole slipped sideways, his injured shoulder giving way under the strain. He hit the ground hard, rolling to avoid the hooves of his own startled mount. The cattle were seconds away. There was no time to remount, no time to run. Emma watched in horror as Cole struggled to his feet, placing himself between the oncoming herd and his horse, where Lucy still clung, wide-eyed with terror. "Cole!" Emma's scream tore from her throat as she pushed her mare faster, knowing she couldn't reach him in time. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Cole stood his ground, waving his arms and shouting at the lead steer, a massive Hereford bull that could easily crush him. At the last moment, the animal swerved, its bulk creating enough momentum that the animals behind it followed, diverting the stampede just enough to miss Cole and Lucy. The herd thundered past, missing them by inches. The ground shook with their passing, mud spraying in all directions. When the last animal had passed, Cole dropped to one knee, clearly spent. Emma reached them moments later, practically falling from her horse in her haste. Lucy was sobbing, still clutching the saddle horn of Cole's mount. "What were you thinking?" Emma cried, her fear transforming instantly to anger as she pulled her daughter from the horse. "You could have been killed." Lucy's face was streaked with rain and tears. "I saw from the window the cattle running. I wanted to help." "By getting yourself trampled?" Emma's hands shook as she checked her daughter for injuries. "I told you to stay in the house." "I'm sorry, Mama." Lucy sobbed, clinging to her mother. "I was scared for you." Emma closed her eyes briefly, her terror giving way to overwhelming relief. She held Lucy tightly, then turned to Cole, who was still kneeling in the mud. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice catching. He shook his head, though the grimace as he tried to stand told a different story. "Just winded." Shoulder took a hit. Emma helped him to his feet, noticing how he favored his right side. "You saved her life. Anyone would have done the same." His eyes moved to Lucy, softening with concern. "You okay, kiddo?" Lucy nodded, her face still buried against Emma's rain slicker. "The cattle," Cole said, looking toward where the herd had disappeared into the storm. "They're headed for the creek." Reality crashed back. They'd averted one disaster only to face another. If they lost the herd, they lost everything. "Lucy, you ride with me," Emma decided. "Cole, can you—" "I'll be right behind you," he assured her, already moving toward his horse. With Lucy secured in front of her on the saddle, Emma set off after the cattle. The rain was coming down harder now, reducing visibility to mere yards. She could hear Cole behind them, his horse's hooves splashing through the deepening puddles. They found the herd gathered at the creek's edge, milling in confusion. The water had risen dramatically, the normally placid stream now a churning, debris-filled torrent. A few animals had ventured into the shallows, but most seemed reluctant to cross. "We might still be able to turn them," Cole called, drawing alongside Emma. "While they're hesitating." Together, they began working the edges of the herd, gradually applying pressure to turn the animals away from the creek. Lucy remained quiet, sensing the importance of the task, her small body pressed against Emma's for warmth and security. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to make progress. The lead animals turned, seeking a path away from the water and the humans pressing them from both sides. Yard by yard, they maneuvered the herd toward the north pasture and higher ground. By the time they reached the pasture gate, Emma was exhausted, her arms aching from controlling both her horse and her frightened daughter. Cole dismounted to open the gate, wincing as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. Once the cattle were safely enclosed, Emma allowed herself to breathe. They'd done it. Despite the storm, despite the stampede, despite Lucy's near-disastrous appearance, they'd saved the herd. "Let's get back to the house," Cole suggested, rain streaming down his face. "This is just the beginning of the storm. We need to get dry." The return journey was slow, all three of them drained from the morning's events. Lucy had stopped crying but remained unnaturally quiet, perhaps finally understanding the gravity of her disobedience. As they approached the farmhouse, Emma noticed something that hadn't been there when they left. A large tree branch had crashed through the kitchen window, leaving glass and debris scattered across the floor they could see through the gaping hole. "Oh no," Lucy whispered. Emma felt a wave of despair. One more repair she couldn't afford, one more problem she'd have to solve alone once Cole left. As if reading her thoughts, Cole spoke quietly. "I can fix that. You don't have to. I want to." His eyes met hers, steady and determined despite the rain that poured between them. "Let me help, Emma." Something in his voice, in the simple sincerity of his offer, broke through her carefully constructed defenses. She was so tired of doing everything alone, of pretending she didn't need anyone, of pushing away any possibility of connection, because it might lead to pain. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you." They stabled the horses quickly, then made a dash for the house. Inside, the kitchen was a mess of broken glass, wet leaves, and splintered wood. The branch had taken out not just the window, but part of the frame as well. "Lucy, go change into dry clothes," Emma instructed, trying to keep the exhaustion from her voice. "Then stay in your room until I call you." The girl nodded meekly and disappeared up the stairs, leaving Emma and Cole alone in the damaged kitchen. "You should change too," he said, removing his soaked hat and running a hand through his wet hair. "I'll see what I can do about covering this until the storm passes." Emma wanted to argue, to insist she could handle it, but the events of the morning had drained her of fight. Instead, she nodded and headed for her bedroom. When she returned in dry clothes, her hair toweled and braided, she found Cole had already swept up the glass and was measuring the window opening with a tape measure he'd found somewhere. "I've got some plywood in the barn that should cover this temporarily," he said without looking up. "Once the storm passes, we can see about proper repairs." Emma leaned against the doorframe, watching him work. "Why are you doing all this?" He paused, finally meeting her eyes. "Because you need help. Because that little girl upstairs deserves a safe, dry home. Because this farm matters to you, so it matters to me." "You barely know us," she whispered. "I know enough." He set down the tape measure. "I know you're the strongest woman I've ever met. I know you've been carrying this place on your shoulders alone for too long. And I know that sometimes even the strongest people need someone to lean on." The simple truth of his words cut through her exhaustion, her fear, her stubborn independence. For the first time in 3 years, Emma allowed herself to consider the possibility of not being alone, of sharing her burdens with someone who chose to be there, not out of obligation but out of genuine care. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the damaged kitchen, something fragile and new began to take root. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The storm intensified throughout the afternoon, rain pounding against the farmhouse with relentless fury. Cole had managed to secure a sheet of plywood over the broken window, working methodically, despite his injured shoulder. Emma had insisted on helping, holding the heavy board in place while he hammered it secure, their bodies close in the confined space of the damaged kitchen. Now they sat at the kitchen table, mugs of hot tea warming their hands as they listened to the weather radio's crackling updates. The worst of the system was directly over them, the announcer's voice grave as he listed road closures and evacuation orders for low-lying areas. "Highway 16 is completely underwater at the Miller Creek Bridge," the radio crackled. "Emergency services are advising all residents to shelter in place unless absolutely necessary to evacuate. This storm system is expected to continue through the night." Emma glanced toward the stairs where Lucy had finally fallen asleep after the exhaustion of the morning's events. "At least the cattle are safe on higher ground." Cole nodded, his eyes following her gaze. "She's a brave kid, reckless, but brave." "She gets that from her father," Emma said softly. "Robert never thought about consequences, just jumped in whenever he saw someone needing help." She traced the rim of her mug. "It's what got him killed in the end." Cole remained silent, waiting for her to continue if she chose to. After a moment, she did. "There was an accident on the highway, a car with a family inside, upside down in a ditch. Robert stopped to help. He got the parents and their baby out, but when he went back for their little boy..." Her voice caught. "A semi couldn't stop in time on the wet road. Robert never even saw it coming." "I'm sorry," Cole said simply. Emma nodded, swallowing hard. "The worst part was that Lucy was in our truck, watching the whole thing. She was 7, old enough to understand what happened, but too young to process it. That explains why she ran into danger today," Cole observed quietly. "Trying to help you, no matter the risk. Just like her father." Emma set down her mug. "After Robert died, I promised myself I'd never put Lucy through that kind of loss again. That's why I can't..." She trailed off, unable to voice the complicated emotions that had been building since Cole's arrival. "Can't let anyone get close," he finished for her. Can't risk Lucy getting attached to someone who might leave. Or die, she whispered. Everyone leaves eventually, one way or another. Cole was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the drumming of rain and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. My grandmother used to say that loving people was always a risk, but not loving them was a guarantee of loss. He met her eyes across the table. She lost my grandfather when they were both young, raised my father alone, then lost my father and mother in the accident, but she never stopped opening her heart. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. His smile was tinged with sadness. She'd have liked you. Said women who can gentle horses and raise daughters alone have the strongest kind of courage. Emma felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. Before she could respond, a tremendous crash from outside shook the house. They both jumped to their feet. That sounded like the old oak, Emma said, reaching for her slicker. If it's fallen on the barn, I'll check, Cole said, already heading for the door. You stay with Lucy. We'll both go, Emma countered, pulling on her boots. If the animals are in danger, we'll need 2 people. He looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded instead. Let's be quick. They stepped out into the storm, immediately drenched despite their rain gear. The wind nearly knocked Emma off her feet as they made their way toward the barn. Through sheets of rain, she could see that her fears were justified. The massive oak that had stood for generations at the edge of the yard had finally surrendered to the elements, crashing onto the corner of the barn roof. Inside, the horses were nickering nervously, sensing the danger even if they couldn't see it. Cole immediately moved to check the structural integrity of the damaged section, while Emma soothed the frightened animals. How bad is it? She called over the sound of rain hammering on the metal roof. Cole examined the splintered beams, testing their strength with careful hands. It's compromised, but still holding. If that tree shifts, though... Emma understood the unspoken danger. If the weight of the oak caused the roof to collapse, the horses could be injured or killed. The barn itself might be irreparable. We need to move them, she decided. The old tobacco shed is still sound. They'll be cramped, but safe. Together, they led the nervous horses through the rain to the smaller outbuilding. By the time they secured the last animal, both were soaked to the skin despite their rain gear, and Emma was shivering uncontrollably. We need to get inside, Cole said, noticing her trembling. You're freezing. Just one more thing, Emma insisted, turning toward a small shed attached to the barn. The generator. If the power goes... As if on cue, the yard lights flickered and died, plunging them into storm-darkened afternoon that felt more like night. Of course, Emma muttered, pushing wet hair from her face. Perfect timing. Cole followed her to the shed where the backup generator was housed. Thankfully, it had been serviced recently and started on the second pull. Lights flickered back to life in the farmhouse windows, a beacon guiding them through the downpour. They were halfway to the house when Emma's foot caught in a hidden depression, now a mud-filled trap. She pitched forward with a startled cry, throwing out her hands to break her fall. Cole caught her before she hit the ground, strong arms wrapping around her waist. The momentum carried them both against the side of the house, Cole taking the brunt of the impact to shield her. For a moment, they stood frozen, her back against his chest, his breath warm against her neck despite the cold rain. You okay? He asked, his voice low near her ear. Emma nodded, unable to speak. She was acutely aware of his body pressed against hers, the strength in the arms that held her, the rapid beating of his heart that matched her own. Slowly, she turned within the circle of his arms until they were face to face. Rain streamed down his features, darkening his lashes and plastering his hair to his forehead. There was something in his eyes that made her breath catch, a hunger, a question, a promise. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. Part of her, a part she'd thought long dormant, wanted him to. Instead, he gently set her away from him. "We should get inside," he said, his voice rough. The spell broken, Emma nodded and led the way to the porch. Inside, they found Lucy at the bottom of the stairs, eyes wide with fear. "The lights went out and I got scared," she admitted. "Then I saw you both out the window. Is the barn okay?" "It's damaged, but the horses are safe," Emma assured her, conscious of the puddles they were creating on the floor. "We moved them to the tobacco shed." Lucy looked from her mother to Cole, her expression suddenly shrewd beyond her years. "You're both soaking wet." "That tends to happen in a storm," Cole said lightly, removing his dripping hat. "Your mom nearly took a mud bath out there, but I caught her in time." Lucy's face lit up. "You saved Mama too, just like you saved me?" Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I wouldn't put it quite like that. Seems like saving Sullivans is becoming my specialty." Cole interrupted with a wink at Lucy that made the girl giggle. "You should get changed," Emma told him, desperate to change the subject. "There are some of Robert's old clothes in the chest in the guest room. They might be a bit small, but they're dry." He nodded, heading for the stairs. "I'll be quick. Then I'll see what I can do about getting us some dinner with that broken window making the kitchen an icebox." When he was gone, Lucy turned to her mother with that same too perceptive look. "I like him, Mama. He's nice and brave." "Yes, he is," Emma agreed cautiously. Is he going to stay after the storm? The simple question carried such weight. Emma looked down at her daughter's hopeful face and felt the walls she'd built around her heart begin to crumble further. "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered honestly. "That's not just up to us." "But if it was," Lucy persisted, "if it was just up to us, would you want him to stay?" Outside, the storm raged on, battering the old farmhouse with wind and rain. But inside, in the warm glow of the emergency lights, Emma found herself considering possibilities she'd refused to acknowledge for 3 long years. "Let's get you back to bed," she said, avoiding the question she wasn't ready to answer, even to herself. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But as she tucked Lucy in for the second time that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the moment in the rain, the feeling of Cole's arms around her, and the way her heart had raced with something other than fear for the first time in years. Emma couldn't sleep. The storm showed no signs of abating, wind howling around the eaves of the old farmhouse like a living thing. She checked on Lucy twice, relieved to find her daughter sleeping soundly despite the noise. The events of the day had exhausted the girl physically and emotionally. Giving up on rest, Emma pulled on her robe and made her way downstairs. A soft glow from the kitchen caught her attention. Cole was seated at the table, a mug between his hands, staring out at the rain through the plywood-covered window. He'd changed into Robert's old flannel shirt and jeans, both a bit too small for his frame, but better than his soaked clothes. He looked up as she entered. "Can't sleep either." Emma shook her head, moving to the stove where the kettle still held warm water. "Too much on my mind." "The barn?" he asked. "That, among other things." She prepared a cup of chamomile tea and joined him at the table. "How's your shoulder?" Cole rotated it carefully. "Stiff, but I've had worse. You should let me look at it. I may not have finished veterinary school, but I know my way around injuries." A smile tugged at his mouth. "Are you comparing me to one of your horses, Mrs. Sullivan?" The teasing note in his voice warmed her more than the tea. "If the horseshoe fits, Mr. Jackson." His laugh was soft and genuine. For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. "Thank you," Emma said finally, "for saving Lucy today." I don't know what I would have done if... She couldn't finish the thought. You don't need to thank me for that, he replied, his expression serious. Ever. The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep inside her. She looked down at her tea, struggling with emotions she'd kept locked away for too long. I should have told her more about her father, she said softly. About how he died. Maybe then she wouldn't have taken such a risk today. Cole was quiet for a moment. Kids Lucy's age, they understand death, but not the permanence of it. Not really. He traced the rim of his mug with one finger. After my parents died, I kept expecting them to walk through the door. Even though I'd seen the accident, even though I'd been at the funeral. Emma looked up, struck by the parallel. You were Lucy's age? He nodded. 9. Old enough to comprehend what happened, but young enough to believe in miracles. His eyes met hers. My grandmother never sugar-coated things, but she always left room for hope, said that's how people survive the unsurvivable. How did she do that? Emma asked. Leave room for hope without lying? She told stories about my parents, about how love doesn't end with death. His voice deepened with memory. She said as long as we remembered them, they were still with us in the ways that mattered most. Emma thought about how rarely she spoke of Robert to Lucy, how she'd packed away his photographs, his belongings, as if removing the evidence of his existence might somehow lessen the pain of his absence. I've done everything wrong, she whispered. Cole reached across the table, his hand covering hers. No. You've done the best you could with an impossible situation. There's no handbook for grief. The warmth of his touch sent a current through her that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with longing. Emma withdrew her hand, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment had become. The two of them alone in the kitchen in the middle of the night, the storm isolating them from the rest of the world. Tell me about your farm, she said, changing the subject. You mentioned you were raised on one? If Cole noticed her retreat, he didn't comment on it. Not a farm so much as a small homestead. 5 acres, a vegetable garden, some chickens, a couple of milk cows. Nothing like this place. You seem to know your way around, though. Worked ranches all over, picking up skills as I went. Never stayed in one place too long. He glanced out at the storm, never found a reason to. The implication hung in the air between them. Emma found herself wondering what it would take for a man like Cole Jackson to put down roots, to decide that wandering wasn't enough anymore. Lucy asked if you were staying, she said, the words out before she could reconsider. After the storm, his gaze returned to her, careful and measuring. What did you tell her? That it wasn't just up to us. Emma traced a nod in the wooden table. That it would be your decision too. And if it was up to you, he asked quietly, would you want me to stay? It was the same question Lucy had asked, but coming from Cole, it carried a different weight, different possibilities. Emma found herself at a crossroads she hadn't expected to face so soon. I don't know, she answered honestly. 3 days ago, I was certain I wanted you gone as soon as possible. Now, I'm not certain of anything. She met his eyes. Except that you've done more for this farm, for us, in 3 days than anyone has in 3 years. He nodded slowly. I meant what I said before. I like helping you. I like being here. But for how long? The question that had been haunting her finally emerged. A week? A month? Until the next rodeo or the next ranch that needs help? She shook her head. Lucy's already attached to you. If you stay longer only to leave when things get tough or boring or when a better opportunity comes along, is that what you think I'd do? There was no anger in his voice, just a genuine desire to understand. I think it's what you've always done, by your own admission. Emma sighed. And I don't blame you for it. Some people aren't meant to stay in one place. Cole was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. Outside, the wind had begun to die down, though the rain continued its steady drumming against the roof. When I was on the rodeo circuit, he finally said, there was this old-timer who'd been riding bulls for 30 years, broken every bone you can name, but still climbing on those animals weekend after weekend. He leaned forward slightly. I asked him once why he didn't retire, find a nice ranch job somewhere. Know what he told me? Emma shook her head. He said, son, some men ride because they're running from something. Some ride because they're searching for something. The trick is knowing which one you are. Cole's eyes held hers. I've been searching, Emma, not running. For what? She whispered. A place that feels like more than just a stop along the way. People who matter enough to build a life around. He paused. I'm not saying 3 days is enough to know for sure, but it's enough to make me want to find out. The raw honesty in his voice stole her breath. It would be so easy to believe him, to imagine that this man, this stranger who had walked into their lives so unexpectedly, could be the answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. I'm afraid, she admitted, the words barely audible. Of what? Of trusting, of hoping, of letting myself believe this could be something real, only to find out it was temporary all along. She looked down at her hands. I can't do that to Lucy, and I can't do it to myself. The storm chose that moment to assert itself, a particularly violent gust rattling the windows. Both of them looked up, then back at each other. I'm not asking for promises, Cole said gently. Just a chance. Stay through the storm cleanup. Let me help rebuild what's been damaged. Then we can decide what comes next. It was a reasonable request, practical, limited, with no long-term commitment required from either of them. Yet Emma knew that if she agreed, she would be opening a door that had been firmly closed since Robert's death. Just until the repairs are done, she said finally. Then we'll see. The relief and hope that crossed his face made her heart skip. Thank you. Before she could respond, a sound from upstairs made them both look toward the ceiling. Lucy's voice, frightened and disoriented, called out, Mama! Emma rose immediately. Nightmare, she explained. The storm. Go, Cole nodded. She needs you. As Emma headed for the stairs, she paused, glancing back at the man sitting at her kitchen table in her late husband's clothes, who had already begun to carve out a place in their lives that would be impossible to fill if he left. Good night, Cole, she said softly. Good night, Emma, he replied, his eyes following her as she climbed the stairs to comfort her daughter. In Lucy's room, Emma found the girl sitting up in bed, eyes wide with fear. I had a bad dream, she whispered as Emma sat beside her. About the cattle and the water and Daddy. Emma gathered her daughter into her arms, stroking her hair. It's okay, sweetheart, you're safe, we're all safe. Is Mr. Jackson still here? Lucy asked, her voice muffled against Emma's shoulder. Yes, he's downstairs. Emma hesitated, then added, he's going to stay for a while. Help us fix the barn and the window. Lucy pulled back, her face brightening despite the lingering fear from her nightmare. Really? He's staying? For now, Emma cautioned, while we need the help. But as she tucked Lucy back into bed and returned to her own room, Emma wondered if she was already too late, if both she and Lucy had already begun to need Cole Jackson for reasons that had nothing to do with broken windows or damaged barns. Morning arrived with unexpected brilliance, the storm having blown itself out sometime before dawn. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the water damage and debris, but also bringing a sense of renewal. Emma stood on the porch, coffee mug in hand, surveying the aftermath. The farm looked like it had been through a war. Branches scattered across the yard, the massive oaks still resting against the damaged barn, mud everywhere. But they had survived. The cattle were safe on higher ground, the horses unharmed in the tobacco shed, and most importantly, Lucy was inside eating breakfast, chattering excitedly about helping with cleanup, as if yesterday's brush with danger had never happened. Emma heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Cole joining her on the porch, his own coffee steaming in the cool morning air. He'd been up since before dawn, checking on the animals and assessing damage. His hair was still damp from a shower, and he'd put his own clothes back on, now dried. "How bad is it?" she asked, though she could see for herself. "Could have been worse," he replied, leaning against the porch railing. "Barn needs serious work, but it's fixable. Creek's receding already. Roads should be passable by afternoon." The mention of roads reminded Emma that Cole now had the option to leave if he wanted to. Despite their midnight conversation, despite his talk of searching rather than running, the daylight brought with it a return of her doubts. "The cattle need to be brought back down," she said, focusing on practical matters, "and we should check the fences. The current probably took down several sections along the creek." Cole nodded. "I already called Hank Miller. He's sending his sons over with lumber for the barn and extra hands for the cattle. Should be here around noon." Emma stared at him. "You called Hank? Hope that's okay. Figured you could use the help. And he owed me a favor from when I helped him with that tractor engine last week." Last week. It struck Emma suddenly that Cole had been in the area longer than she'd realized. He'd made connections, established relationships with other farmers. "Thank you," she managed. "The extra hands will make a big difference." Lucy burst through the screen door, her face alight with excitement. "Can I help with the cleanup, Mama? Please, I promise I'll be careful." Before Emma could answer, Cole spoke. "Actually, I could use a good assistant today. Someone who knows where all the tools are kept and isn't afraid of a little mud." Lucy bounced on her toes. "I know where everything is. Dad showed me the whole workshop before." She stopped abruptly, darting a guilty look at her mother. Emma felt a familiar pang at the mention of Robert, but pushed it aside. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can talk about your father." The look of relief on Lucy's face made Emma's heart ache. How much had her daughter been holding inside, afraid to even mention Robert for fear of causing pain? "Your dad taught you well," Cole said easily, filling the awkward silence. "I bet you know more about tools than most grown men." Lucy's chest puffed with pride. "He said I was the best helper he ever had. Then I'm lucky to have you on my team." Cole glanced at Emma, seeking permission. She nodded, touched by his sensitivity. "Just stay where I can see you, Lucy, and listen to Mr. Jackson." "Cole," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be working together, might as well use my first name." "Cole?" Lucy repeated, testing the name with a wide grin. "Does that mean I'm on your team too, Mama?" Emma couldn't help but smile at her daughter's enthusiasm. "Yes, we're all on the same team today." The words carried more weight than she'd intended, and she saw Cole register their significance, his eyes warming. For a moment, the three of them stood on the porch, framed by morning sunlight, like a tableau of what could be. The sound of a truck engine broke the spell. Emma looked down the drive to see Marcus Fletcher's pickup approaching, mud splattered but moving steadily along the sodden driveway. "That's odd," she murmured. "Marcus never comes out this way unless it's about cattle prices." Cole straightened, his posture shifting subtly. "Want me to talk to him?" "No, I've got it." Emma set down her coffee cup. "Lucy, why don't you go get the tool belt your father made for you? Show Cole what you've got." As Lucy dashed inside, Emma descended the porch steps to meet her visitor. Marcus Fletcher was the largest cattle buyer in the county, a shrewd businessman in his 50s who had tried to purchase the Sullivan farm at a fraction of its value after Robert's death. "Marcus," she greeted him coolly, "surprised to see you out after the storm." He climbed out of his truck, his assessing gaze taking in the damage to the property before settling on Emma. "Checking on my investments. Heard you had some trouble up here." "Nothing we can't handle," she replied, conscious of Cole watching from the porch. Marcus's eyes flicked to Cole, narrowing slightly. "So I see. New hired hand?" The question carried an edge that made Emma bristle. "Friend, helping with storm damage." Marcus didn't sound convinced. "Well, I actually came with a proposition for you, Emma. In light of the storm damage, I'm prepared to renew my offer on your place. Full market value this time." Emma stared at him, stunned by his audacity. "The farm isn't for sale, Marcus. It never has been." "Be reasonable," he pressed. "You're looking at thousands in repairs. Insurance won't cover half of it. You've been hanging on by a thread for years, and we both know it." He lowered his voice, though not enough that Cole couldn't hear. "Think about Lucy. Wouldn't she be better off somewhere stable? Somewhere you're not one bad season away from foreclosure?" The mention of her daughter sent a surge of anger through Emma. Before she could respond, Cole's boots sounded on the steps behind her. "Mrs. Sullivan said the farm isn't for sale," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "I believe that concludes your business here." Marcus's face hardened. "And you are?" "Cole Jackson." Recognition flickered in the older man's eyes. "The rodeo rider? Heard you were drifting through." His gaze moved between them, calculating. "Didn't realize you'd found such comfortable accommodations." The insinuation hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Cole remained unruffled. "The only thing you need to realize," Cole said evenly, "is that you're trespassing on private property after being told your offer isn't welcome." For a tense moment, the two men measured each other. Then Marcus stepped back toward his truck. "Just trying to be neighborly, Emma. Storm hit everyone hard. Lots of folks considering their options." He climbed into the driver's seat. "Offer stands. Think about Lucy's future." As the truck pulled away, Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Though I could have handled him. I know you could have." Cole's voice held no hint of condescension, but sometimes it's nice not to have to handle everything alone. The simple truth of his words struck her deeply. How long had she been shouldering every burden, fighting every battle, making every decision in isolation? "He's been after the farm since Robert died," she explained, watching the truck disappear down the drive. "Started with insulting offers, then moved on to veiled threats about the bank calling in our loans. Has he approached any of your neighbors?" Emma nodded. 3 have sold to him in the past year. He's buying up land all through the valley, piece by piece." Cole's expression darkened. "For what purpose?" "No one knows for sure. There are rumors about development plans, a resort or vacation homes." She sighed. "But it doesn't matter. This farm has been in Robert's family for generations. I won't be the one to sell it off." Lucy burst out of the house, proudly displaying a child-sized leather tool belt, well worn but lovingly maintained. "Dad made this for my 8th birthday," she announced. "I've got my own hammer and everything." Cole knelt to admire the gift, his face softening as he examined each tool. "This is professional quality work," he told her. "Your dad knew what he was doing." Emma watched them, Marcus's words echoing in her mind. Was she being selfish, trying to keep the farm going against such odds? Was Lucy truly better off here? Or was Emma holding on to the past at the expense of her daughter's future? As if sensing her thoughts, Cole looked up, his eyes meeting hers with quiet understanding. "Some things are worth fighting for," he said simply. In that moment, with the morning sun illuminating the three of them amid the storm's aftermath, Emma wasn't sure if he was talking about the farm or something else entirely. By noon, the Sullivan farm had transformed into a hive of activity. Hank Miller had arrived with his 3 sons and enough lumber to rebuild half the barn. 2 neighboring families had sent helpers as well, a spontaneous work party forming in the way that rural communities often rallied around their own in times of crisis. Emma watched from the paddock gate as Cole directed the operation with natural authority, assigning tasks based on each person's strengths. Lucy shadowed him proudly, her tool belt cinched tight around her waist, handing him nails and holding the measuring tape when needed. "Your cowboy knows what he's doing," Maggie Miller commented, joining Emma at the fence. She'd arrived with her husband bringing enough food to feed the workers. "He's not my cowboy," Emma replied automatically, though the denial felt hollow even to her own ears. Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Could have fooled me and half the county from the way he stood up to Marcus Fletcher. Word travels fast." Emma sighed. Of course it did. In a community this small, everyone knew everyone's business within hours. Marcus was being his usual charming self. Cole just happened to be there. Maggie's knowing tone made Emma flush. "And he just happened to be here during the worst storm in 10 years, and just happened to help save your cattle, and just happened to know exactly how to coordinate a barn repair." "He was passing through," Emma insisted, "staying in the bunkhouse." "Honey, men like that don't just pass through unless they're looking for something." Maggie nodded toward where Cole was lifting a beam into place, muscles straining beneath his shirt. "And I'd say he found it." Before Emma could formulate a response, Lucy came running over, her face flushed with excitement. "Mama, Cole says I'm the best assistant he's ever had, even better than the guys he worked with on the Thompson Ranch in Montana." Emma smiled despite her discomfort with Maggie's observations. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Just remember to be careful around all those tools." "I am. Cole showed me the safe way to carry a hammer and everything." Lucy's expression turned pleading. "Can I stay and help until they finish the roof section, please?" "As long as you stay on the ground," Emma conceded. "No climbing ladders." Lucy whooped and raced back to Cole's side, relaying the permission with obvious delight. Emma watched as he solemnly presented her with a box of nails to sort, treating the simple task as if it were the most important job on the site. "That man's good with her," Maggie observed quietly. "Reminds me of Robert, the way he takes her seriously." The comparison startled Emma. She'd been so determined to see Cole as temporary, as different from Robert in every way, that she hadn't noticed the similarities. The patience with Lucy, the quiet competence, the way he could communicate volumes with just a look. "Robert would have liked him," Maggie continued, seemingly unaware of Emma's internal revelation. "Always said you were too stubborn to ask for help even when you needed it most." A lump formed in Emma's throat. It was true. Robert had often teased her about her fierce independence, her determination to prove she could handle anything life threw at them. After his death, that trait had hardened into something almost brittle, pride and fear intertwined, until she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. "I should check on the cattle," Emma said, needing space to process her thoughts. "The creek's down enough that we should be able to move them back to the lower pasture soon." Maggie nodded, understanding Emma's need to retreat. "Go on. We've got plenty of hands here. I'll keep an eye on Lucy." Emma saddled her mare and rode out to the north pasture where the cattle were grazing, untroubled by the previous day's drama. The physical exertion of riding and the simple routine of checking the herd helped clear her mind. By the time she'd made a complete circuit of the pasture, she felt more centered. On her return ride, she paused at the ridge that overlooked the farm. From this vantage point, she could see the full scope of activity. Men working on the barn, others clearing debris from the yard, smoke rising from the outdoor grill where Maggie was preparing lunch. It looked so normal, so right, like a scene from before Robert died, when community gatherings at the Sullivan farm had been regular occurrences. How long had it been since she'd allowed anyone to help like this? Since she'd welcomed neighbors onto her land for anything other than strictly business matters? She'd been so focused on proving she could manage alone that she'd isolated herself and Lucy from the very community that was now rallying around them. And at the center of it all was Cole, moving between groups of workers, checking progress, offering assistance where needed. Even from a distance, she could see how naturally he fit into the tableau, as if he'd always been part of this place, this life. The realization terrified her. By the time Emma returned to the farmyard, the crew had broken for lunch. Long tables had been set up under the ancient maple tree that dominated the side yard, workers filling plates with Maggie's fried chicken and potato salad. Lucy sat between Cole and Hank's youngest son, chattering animatedly, her earlier brush with danger seemingly forgotten. Cole stood as Emma approached, offering her a plate he'd prepared. "Saved you some before these vultures devoured everything," he said with a smile that made her heart skip. "Thank you." She took the plate, acutely aware of the interested glances from their neighbors. "The progress looks amazing." "We should have the damage section secure by nightfall," he reported. "The window in the kitchen is next on the list." Hank brought some proper glass to replace the plywood. "I can't believe how much you've all accomplished already," Emma said, addressing the group. "I don't know how to thank you." Hank waved a chicken leg dismissively. "No thanks needed. You'd do the same for any of us." He nodded toward Cole. "Besides, your man here made a compelling case for lending a hand. Said you're fighting off Marcus Fletcher's latest attempt to buy you out." "He's not my—" Emma began automatically, then stopped herself, flushing. "Yes, Marcus came by this morning with another offer. Third farm he's tried to pressure this month," one of the other men commented. "Guthrie Place went last week. Heard he's planning some kind of resort development. Tourist cabins and a golf course," another added. "County commissioners are already reviewing preliminary plans." Emma's stomach clenched. If Marcus had progressed to submitting plans, his interest in acquiring her land would only intensify. The Sullivan farm occupied a prime spot along the creek, with the kind of scenic views that wealthy vacationers would pay premium prices to enjoy. "Your land, your decision," Hank said firmly, reading her expression. "But just so you know, some of us are organizing against the development. Not everyone wants to see this valley turned into a playground for rich city folks." Cole had remained quiet during this exchange, but Emma could feel his attention on her, gauging her reaction. When their eyes met briefly, she saw understanding there. He recognized the pressure she was under, the complexity of her position. "The farm's not for sale," she said firmly, "to Marcus or anyone else." A murmur of approval ran through the group. Lucy beamed up at her mother, clearly proud of her stance. As lunch concluded and the men returned to work, Cole lingered at Emma's side. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes, just processing. I didn't realize Marcus's plans were so far along." Cole nodded. "Makes his timing suspicious, doesn't it? Swooping in right after the storm when you're most vulnerable." The observation matched Emma's own thoughts. He's always been opportunistic. "People like that usually have weak spots," Cole noted, "if you know where to look." Before Emma could ask what he meant, Lucy tugged at his arm. "Come on, Cole, you promised to show me how to use the level, remember?" He smiled down at the girl. "So I did. Can't break a promise to my best assistant." He glanced back at Emma. We'll talk more later." She nodded, watching as Lucy led him back to the barn, chattering the entire way. The easy rapport between them both warmed her heart and unsettled it. Every day, every hour that Cole remained made the inevitable parting more difficult to contemplate. Yet as she observed the activity around her farm, neighbors helping neighbors, the barn rising anew from storm damage, Lucy's face alight with purpose and joy. Emma couldn't help but wonder if perhaps some storms came not to destroy, but to clear the way for something new to be built in their wake. By sunset, the damaged section of the barn stood repaired, the new lumber pale against the weathered gray of the original structure. Most of the neighbors had departed with promises to return the following day, leaving only the Miller family to share a quiet dinner on the porch. Lucy had finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep on the porch swing despite her determined efforts to stay awake with the adults. "I'll put her to bed," Emma said, gathering her daughter into her arms. Lucy stirred but didn't wake, her small face peaceful in sleep, dirt smudged across one cheek from her day of dedicated assistance. When Emma returned, Hank was deep in conversation with Cole about the creek's water flow and potential flood control measures. Maggie handed Emma a glass of sweet tea, nodding toward the men with a knowing smile. "He's been picking Hank's brain about the valley all evening," Maggie said quietly, "asking about rainfall patterns, growing seasons, local markets, not the questions of a man planning to drift through." Emma watched Cole, noting the intensity in his expression as he listened to Hank's explanation of the watershed. She'd seen that look before, on Robert's face years ago when they'd first discussed taking over his family's farm. It was the look of a man making plans, imagining possibilities, putting down roots. "He hardly knows us," Emma murmured, more to herself than to Maggie. "Some people find what they're looking for faster than others," Maggie replied. "When Hank proposed after 3 weeks, my father thought he was crazy. 32 years later." She shrugged, the simple gesture encompassing decades of shared life. Before Emma could respond, Hank stood and stretched. "We should head out. Early start tomorrow if we're going to finish that kitchen window before noon." Goodbyes were exchanged, with Maggie enfolding Emma in a warm hug. "Let yourself be happy," she whispered. "Robert would want that for you." Then they were gone, taillights disappearing down the drive, leaving Emma and Cole alone on the porch in the gathering darkness. Crickets had begun their nightly chorus, and the first fireflies of the season danced above the rain-refreshed grass. "You have good neighbors," Cole observed, leaning against the porch railing. "The best," Emma agreed, settling into one of the rocking chairs. "I'd forgotten that somehow." Cole nodded, understanding what she hadn't said, that grief and pride had isolated her, that accepting help had felt too much like admitting failure. "Lucy was incredible today," he said, changing the subject. "Never seen a kid so determined to be useful. Reminds me of someone." His eyes found hers in the dim light, warm with affection. "Is that your subtle way of calling me stubborn?" Emma asked, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'd call it determined, resilient." He moved to sit in the rocker beside hers. "Inspiring." The compliment sent warmth spreading through her chest. For so long she'd seen her struggle to keep the farm as just that, a struggle, a burden she bore out of duty to Robert's memory and Lucy's future. The idea that someone might find inspiration in her efforts was both flattering and disorienting. "Marcus Fletcher stopped by the barn this afternoon while you were checking the cattle," Cole said, his tone casual, though his words were anything but. "Had some interesting things to say." Emma stiffened. "What kind of things?" "Offered me a job. Said a man with my skills could do better than patching barns for widows." His voice remained even, but she could sense the tension beneath. "Suggested that your financial situation was more precarious than you've let on." Emma's hands tightened on the arms of her rocker. Marcus doesn't know anything about my financial situation. Doesn't he? Cole turned to face her fully. He mentioned a second mortgage taken out last year, said the bank's been patient but won't wait forever. The blood drained from Emma's face. Her financial struggles weren't common knowledge. She'd been careful to maintain appearances, to never let on how close to the edge they'd come after last year's drought devastated their hay crop. "How did he know that?" she whispered. "That's what I've been wondering." Cole's expression was grim. "Seems like the kind of information that should be private between you and the bank." The implication was clear, and it matched suspicions Emma had harbored for months. Marcus Fletcher had connections at First National, where most local farmers did business. If he had access to her financial information... "It's not as bad as he made it sound," she said defensively. "Yes, I took a second mortgage to get through last winter after the hay failed, but spring calving was good and the summer market looked strong." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it's not your concern," Emma replied automatically, then winced at her own sharpness. "I'm sorry. That's not fair. I'm not used to discussing these things with anyone. Even when anyone is trying to help." There was hurt in his voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Emma sighed, the rocking chair creaking beneath her as she leaned forward. "Especially then. Accepting help with storm damage is one thing. This is different. More personal." "And that's the line I can't cross?" Cole asked quietly. "Barn repairs and cattle, yes. Your financial struggles, no?" Put that way, it sounded arbitrary, even foolish. Emma struggled to articulate the complex emotions tangled around her pride and independence. "I've spent 3 years proving I can handle this farm alone," she finally said. "That Lucy and I will be okay. That Robert's faith in me wasn't misplaced." "No one's questioning that, Emma. Least of all me." Cole's voice softened. "But there's a difference between being capable and being stubborn to the point of self-destruction." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I think you're fighting so hard to show you don't need anyone that you might lose everything you're fighting for." He hesitated, then added, "And I think Marcus Fletcher knows it. That's why he showed up after the storm with an offer when you're most vulnerable." Emma couldn't deny the truth in his assessment. The strain of maintaining the farm had been wearing her down long before the storm hit. Marcus's timing wasn't coincidental. It was calculated, predatory. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "When he offered you the job?" A smile ghosted across Cole's face. "I suggested he do something anatomically impossible." Despite herself, Emma laughed, the tension between them dissipating. "I would have paid to see his face." It was memorable. Cole's expression grew serious again. "Emma, I need to tell you something. About why I was passing through this area in the first place." There was something in his tone that made her heart constrict. "What is it?" "I wasn't just drifting." He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "I came looking for Marcus Fletcher, tracking him actually." "Tracking him, why?" Cole took a deep breath. "Because he did the same thing in my hometown in Montana. Bought up family farms one by one, promising a development that would bring jobs and prosperity." His voice hardened. 3 years later, those families have nothing. The development stalled after he flipped the properties to a holding company at triple the price. The land sits empty, the community destroyed. Emma felt cold despite the warm evening. "And you think he's doing the same thing here?" "I know he is. I've been following his operations across 3 states. Cole ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "That's why I've been asking so many questions about the valley, the watershed, property values. I've been gathering information." "For what purpose?" Emma asked, trying to process this revelation. "To stop him. to expose his pattern before he destroys another community. Cole met her eyes directly. I didn't plan on staying, on getting involved with... He stopped abruptly. With me? Emma supplied softly. With anyone, he corrected, though his eyes told a different story. It complicates things. Emma felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted once again. The man she'd thought was a drifter, a cowboy passing through, was actually on a mission of justice, or perhaps revenge. The knowledge both relieved and troubled her. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" she asked. "Would you have believed me? A stranger showing up with tales of corrupt developers and community destruction?" He shook his head. "I needed to understand the situation here first, to gather evidence before making accusations." Emma couldn't argue with his logic. She wouldn't have believed him, might even have suspected him of working with Marcus. "So what happens now?" she asked. "You expose Marcus, save the valley, and then..." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the fear that had been growing as they'd drawn closer, that regardless of his feelings for her and Lucy, Cole's path would eventually lead elsewhere. "I don't know," he admitted, the simple honesty of it more reassuring than any promise could have been. "I didn't expect you, Emma, or Lucy, or this place." He gestured to encompass the farm, the night, the moment they were sharing. "I came looking for evidence against Marcus Fletcher and found something I didn't know I was searching for." Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold as Emma stood at the kitchen window, coffee warming her hands. The farm had transformed in the week since the storm, barn repaired, fences mended, debris cleared. Even the oak that had fallen against the barn had been cut into neat stacks of firewood lining the drive. But the most profound changes weren't visible in the landscape. They were in Lucy's renewed spirit, in the easy rhythm that had developed between the three of them, in the way Emma found herself looking forward rather than backward for the first time in years. And in the papers spread across her kitchen table, documents Cole had gathered over months of investigation, evidence of Marcus Fletcher's pattern of exploitation across 3 states. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers, property records revealing the shell companies he used to flip the land, even emails obtained through a contact at the state attorney general's office. "It's enough to start an investigation," Cole had told her last night. "Enough to slow him down, maybe stop him completely." Now she heard his familiar footsteps on the porch, followed by the screen door opening. He entered with an armful of fresh eggs from the henhouse, his hair still damp from an early shower. "Chickens were productive this morning," he said, setting the basket on the counter. "Must be all that extra attention Lucy's been giving them." Emma smiled, remembering her daughter's insistence on taking over chicken duty after Cole had shown her the proper way to gather eggs without disturbing the hens. She adores those birds now. Used to complain every time it was her turn to feed them. Amazing what a little encouragement can do. Cole leaned against the counter, his eyes moving to the papers on the table. "Have you decided?" Emma nodded slowly. Cole had presented her with options last night. They could take the evidence to the authorities immediately, or they could confront Marcus directly, offering him a chance to back away from the valley before they exposed him. "I want to talk to him face to face," she said. "He's hurt too many people, destroyed too many lives. I want to see his face when he realizes it's over." Cole studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll set it up, but I don't want Lucy there." "Agreed. Maggie already offered to take her for the day." Emma hesitated, then added, "What happens after, when this is finished?" The question that had hovered between them for days, unasked until now. Cole moved to stand before her, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap on his skin. "That depends," he said quietly. "On what?" "On whether there's a reason for me to stay." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. The walls she'd built around herself over 3 years of grief and solitude had been crumbling since the moment Cole Jackson walked into her life. Now only the thinnest barrier remained, her fear of loving and losing again. Before she could respond, Lucy's voice called from upstairs, "Mama, I can't find my blue sneakers." The moment fractured, but something in Cole's eyes told Emma the conversation wasn't over, merely postponed. By mid-morning, Lucy had been delivered to the Miller farm, excited about helping Maggie with her famous berry pie recipe. Emma and Cole drove in silence to the appointed meeting place, neutral ground at the Silver Creek Diner on the edge of town. Marcus Fletcher already occupied a back booth, his confident smile faltering slightly when he saw Cole enter behind Emma. His eyes darted between them, calculating. "Emma, I was expecting you alone," he said as they slid into the booth across from him. "Mr. Jackson and I have no secrets," she replied evenly. "Whatever you have to say, he can hear." Marcus's smile tightened. "Very well. I assume you've reconsidered my offer. Given your financial situation, it really is the most sensible solution." "Actually, I wanted to make you an offer," Emma said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. "Leave this valley alone, walk away from your development plans, find somewhere else to destroy." Marcus stared at her for a moment before laughing. "That's not an offer, Emma. That's a delusion. Half the farms in this valley are already in negotiation, and the county commissioners have preliminarily approved the resort plans. Based on fraudulent environmental impact studies," Cole interjected quietly, "and without knowing about your history in Clearwater County, Montana, or Lakeview, Oregon, or the 3 class action lawsuits currently in preparation against your holding companies." The blood drained from Marcus's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." Emma placed a folder on the table and slid it toward him. "It's all here, Marcus. The shell companies, the flipped properties, the stalled developments, the environmental violations, everything." Marcus's hands shook slightly as he opened the folder, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter?" Cole's voice was dangerously soft. "What matters is where they're going next. State Attorney General, FBI, Environmental Protection Agency, unless you agree to our terms." "Which are?" Marcus had regained some composure, the businessman in him assessing the situation with cold practicality. "You walk away," Emma stated firmly. "Cancel the development plans. Release any contracts you've pressured people into signing. Leave this valley and its farms intact." Marcus looked between them, calculation visible in his eyes. "And if I agree, what happens to these?" He tapped the folder. "They stay with us as insurance," Cole replied. "You honor your word, they stay private. You try anything, they go public immediately." For a long moment, Marcus sat in silent consideration. Then, with the practiced smile of a man accustomed to cutting losses, he nodded. "You drive a hard bargain, Emma. Your husband would be proud." The mention of Robert sent a flash of anger through Emma, but she kept her expression neutral. "This isn't about Robert. It's about the future of this valley and the people who've worked this land for generations." "Sentiment," Marcus scoffed. "It's a poor business strategy." "Some things aren't about business," Emma replied. "Some things are about home." The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple syllable. Home. What Emma had been fighting to preserve. What Cole had been searching for. What they might build together if she found the courage to take that final step. Marcus rose, buttoning his jacket with forced casualness. "I'll have my attorney draw up the necessary paperwork. You'll have it by tomorrow." He fixed Cole with a hard stare. "You've made an enemy today." Cole didn't flinch. "Better than being your friend." After Marcus left, Emma released a shaky breath. "Do you think he'll honor it?" "He has no choice," Cole said. Men like Marcus survive by avoiding exposure. He'll find another scheme, another valley, but not here. They drove back to the farm in contemplative silence. Emma felt lighter, as if a shadow that had been hanging over her land had finally lifted. Yet another question remained unanswered, more important than anything involving Marcus Fletcher. As they pulled into the driveway, Emma turned to Cole. "You never answered my question about what happens after." Cole cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the importance of the moment. "I told you that depends on whether there's a reason for me to stay." Emma gathered her courage, 3 years of grief and solitude weighing against the promise of something new. "And if I said there was, then I'd say I've been searching for home my whole life." His eyes held hers, vulnerable and hopeful. "And I found it here, with you and Lucy, when I wasn't even looking." The walls around Emma's heart crumbled completely. "We've both been hiding," she admitted softly. "Me behind my independence, you behind your wandering. Maybe it's time to stop." Cole reached across the seat, his hand finding hers. "I can't promise it will be easy. I'm still learning how to stay in one place. And I'm still learning how to let someone in." Emma squeezed his hand. "But I think..." She took a deep breath. "I think Robert would want this for us, for me and Lucy, to find happiness again. He sounds like a wise man." He was. For the first time, Emma could speak of Robert without that crushing weight of loss. He would always be part of her, part of Lucy, but his memory no longer stood as a barrier to moving forward. "And he would have liked you." The afternoon sun bathed the farmhouse in golden light as they walked hand in hand toward the porch. Emma could picture Lucy returning home. Her excitement at hearing Marcus would no longer threaten their farm. She could imagine evenings on this porch, mornings in the barn, seasons changing as they built something new together. "So," Cole said as they reached the steps, "does this mean I get to move out of the bunkhouse?" Emma laughed, the sound startling in its freedom. "Let's not rush things, Cowboy. I have a reputation to maintain." "Yes, ma'am." But his smile told her he understood. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning, one that deserved to unfold at its own pace. They stood together, looking out over the land that had brought them together. The creek sparkled in the distance. The repaired barn stood strong against the blue sky, and the cattle grazed peacefully in fields that would remain part of the Sullivan farm for another generation. "You know," Cole said thoughtfully, "when I first arrived, you warned me to stay away from your daughter." "I did." Emma smiled at the memory, at how desperately she had tried to keep both Lucy and herself safe from the risk of caring for this man. "How's that working out for you?" he asked, eyes twinkling. Instead of answering, Emma reached up and pulled his face down to hers, her lips finding his in a kiss that spoke of new beginnings, of storms weathered, of home found after long journeys. From the driveway came the sound of Hank Miller's truck returning with Lucy, whose excited voice carried across the yard as she spotted them on the porch. "Mama, Cole, Maggie taught me how to make pie." They separated just as Lucy bounded up the steps, launching herself into Cole's arms with complete trust, the way she had when he'd saved her from the stampeding cattle. He caught her easily, swinging her in a circle that made her giggle with delight. Over Lucy's head, his eyes met Emma's, filled with a promise that needed no words, not just for now, not just until the next storm or the next challenge, but for all the seasons to come. Emma's heart, so carefully guarded for so long, opened fully to embrace the future they would build together, the handsome cowboy who had saved more than just their farm, the daughter who had never lost faith, and the woman who had finally found the courage to love again.